Hello everyone, Pablo here. So in today's video, we're going to continue our SDA lab, and we're going to enable access for our guest users. So we've done a number of configurations and onboarding in previous videos, and we've gotten to the stage where the switching fabric and the fabric wireless has been fully provisioned. And we've enabled our corporate virtual network in the overlay network for those corporate users using 802.1x. So what we're going to do now is enable that guest VN on the overlay in the fabric, and we're going to route that outside of our corporate network. We're going to route it towards the firewall, and then send it out to the internet. So any guest user that is connecting into our network fabric will have complete segmentation from our corporate devices. So there would be no risk of cross-contamination or lateral movement coming from our guests onto our corporate network. As for the steps that we're going to follow, so we're going to add that layer 3 handoff coming from the borders onto the firewall. So we'll see how that configuration will look like in the firewall. I'll be using a Firepower 1010 being managed by FMC to deploy those configurations. I will do a bunch of those in advance, and I'm just going to do a review of those configurations. So that's the second bullet point in there in terms of reviewing those policies and what's the routing done in there in terms of static routes and BGP configurations. So then we're going to create an SSID in DNA Center. As part of that SSID, we're going to create a portal as well and provision that to the waterstand controller. We will then enable the guest VN and assign an IP pool, both to the switching environment and for the wireless, to the IP pool to the SSID. We'll review those the guest portal settings to make sure that the portal is having the correct configuration. And we're going to create then the ICE policy sets for our guests, including the authorization profiles. And once that's done, then we can test an endpoint connecting to both the switch and to the SSID, just to confirm that we can have the guests on the network, on the fabric network. Okay, so let's move on to our lab. Okay, so let's go to DNA Center and add that layer 3 handoff to the borders. Okay, so I'm on DNA Center then, provision fabric sites, select our site, and then go to our border nodes. So let's go with border 1 first, configure that. So we had configure interface 48 towards the fusion, and I had cabled up interface 45 towards the firewall. And I'm going to enable then the guest VM. So we're going to hard code the VLAN in here. Let's actually check here on the border. So what VLANs we have in there. So VLAN 3001 and 3002. So for guest, let's give it 3003. I'll let DNA Center choose the IP addresses based on the pool that I had selected in there. So let's add that. Let's go to border 2, do the same thing. So add an interface 45, test, and let's go and check then border 2. Let's run that same command, 3012 using here. Okay, so let's add that. and deploy that to those border devices. Let's give it a second or two until DNA Center provisions those. But actually, I already see VLAN 3003. If I look at the VRFs, then I can see the guest VRF it's pre-created in there. 3003. And if we move to border 2, so guest VRF would be 3012. So that's my VRF in there. I think at the moment that interface towards the firewall it's down, so we have to complete the configuration from a firewall perspective. So let's do that now. But actually, before we check that, I had forgotten to check here. So let's take note in here pretty quick. So border 1 has this IP address. So I'm just going to be taking note of those. Border 1 IP address. And let's do a show run section rather PGP. And then let's just take the neighbor IP address. So this would be okay. And remote AS 6,000, 65,001. Okay, so that's the same for border 2 then. So it was 3013 or 12 the interface. And let's do show run on rather BGP. And let's get our neighbor as well. Okay. So with that done, we can then move on to the firewall. Okay, so now moving on to the firewall. So let's go to device management and click on our firepower 1010. So I had created a couple of VLANs which match whatever was configured by DNA Center on the borders. What I did here is just create a couple of VLANs in there by selecting add interfaces, create a VLAN interface. So give it a name, description, make sure that I click the enable button, and just make sure that the MTU is the same. It's mirroring what the interface coming from the border is. Otherwise, by reading on the implementation guide for BGP on Firepower, it says that if the MTU is not the same, you may see some neighbor adjacency flaps in there. So I did that and then assign an IPv4 static address in there. So just essentially a mirror of the nodes that we had taken before. Okay. Once that was done, then I moved on to the physical interfaces. So I have interface 1/2 and 1/3. One going to port 1, actually 1/3 and 1/4. One going to border 1 and one going to border 2. So in here, just make sure that they configured as a trunk. And let's enable those as well. So the allowed VLAN on this one is 3003. And the allowed VLAN on this other one is 3012 for border 2. Let's save that and deploy it to the device. Okay, so let's leave that in there. Ask for routing then. So go to General Settings, BGP, enable BGP in there, put the autonomous system, and I give a manual address for the router ID. Moving on to IPv4, BGP for IPv4 then, same thing, enable. And what I did here, this comes as a default, but as a no. So I had just tick the box in there to make it a yes, so we can generate then a default route. So as for our neighbors, so just click add and enter your neighbors in there. So again, following our nodes that we had taken earlier on. So our neighbor, so 137, and the autonomous system would be 65,000 over the border. So just including there a description and enable the address. I left everything else as default, so no changes in there. Okay. And I believe that was it pretty much. So everything, the rest of the options there are left to default. So I think that had completed, or actually still in progress. So let's wait until that finishes. And then lastly, then the policies, the access policies. I have created an access policy in there with 4 lines in it. So the first 2 lines is guests towards ICE and guests towards the Active Directory or the domain controller. So what it's saying is the inside guest zone towards the outside zone. So allowing communications towards ICE only on port 8443 and on port 8905. So that's allowed and login enabled. And similar thing towards the Active Directory domain controller. So 1053.18.3 and allowing DNS, DHCP, ICMP, and NetBIOS in there. So I'm allowing that. And then following is the blocking any sort of communication coming from the guest to any private IPv4 subnet. So there's a default object in Firepower that you can use, which is the IPv4 private all RFC 1918 destination addresses. So I made that a block, and then allowing then connections towards the internet. Guest to internet from the inside guest zone to the outside, coming from the source network guest VN, which is the .216/29, and allow communication to any. Okay, on any port, etc. So hopefully those rules will allow us to move on our lab. Okay, so those that deployment or those interfaces that should have been enabled by now. If I go then to port 1, I see that our interface has changed to up, and our BGP adjacency has changed to up as well. So if I do command to verify, summary, we see the 138. It's good. It's up. By checking the IP route for the VRF guest, I can see then my default route coming from the firewall. What I had also added here manually is an IBGP neighbor relationship between the 2 borders. So I had created interface 141, I believe it is, or 142. So I just gave it an IP address, added to the VRF guest, and added as well the configuration for BGP in there. So on the guest VRF, and I had added the IBGP neighbor relationship in there. So that means that if one of the links goes down, then one of the borders can still route towards the other border. So if we do that default route in there, so at the moment it's going directly towards the firewall. There's an internal route towards the IBGP neighbor. So same thing on the border 2. The adjacency towards the firewall, and then the adjacency towards border 1. Show VLAN and show run section .bgp. Add the adjacencies there on the VRF address family for guest. If we do show IP route VRF guest, we then have our default route installed towards the firewall. Okay, so that's our part done, or our steps done for adding the layer 3 and reviewing the firewall policies and routing. Next step, let's configure our guest SSID and provision that to the wireless LAN controller. Okay, so let's go to DNA Center. So DNA Center, we'll go then to Design, Network Settings, and we'll go to Wireless. We have created a corporate SSID before in previous videos, so now we're going to create a guest SSID. Let's name it guest SSID, and it's going to be 2.4 gigahertz only. It's going to be open, but we'll assign a web policy to it. So let's select the authentication, authorization, accounting server as ICE. What's the type of portal? So self-registration, and where will the guest redirect after a successful authentication? Let's do custom URL, and let's do .com. Okay, we'll leave that as default. We'll use the same profile that I used for the corp SSID. So let's select that for Fabric Wireless and associate that profile. And we can then create a portal for that SSID. So let's create a portal. I'm not going to change anything from it really. I'm just going to give it a name. So let's do self-registration guest VM for the name. Over here from DNA Center, you can create then that portal, put a logo to it for the login, registration page, registration success, etc., etc. I'm going to leave it as default in there. Just give it the name and click save. So that should push the portal towards ICE, where we can then tweak it a little bit. Let's give it a second until that's finished. So we have our self-registration guest VN portal in there. So let's hit next. Okay. Okay, and then our network profile should be pre-configured there with our 3 sites from one of the previous videos we've done. Okay, so we create that guest ID. Let's provision that to the wireless LAN controller. Let's go to provision, inventory. Let's select the waterstand controller and go ahead and provision that. So go all the way to the end of the workflow. We'll see the corporate SSID is there, and as well our guest SSID. Okay. Let's deploy that. So on the controller, then we have our corporate SSID. But if I refresh that page, should have then that guest SSID in there. It should be saying web authentication here. Let's leave it at that for now. Okay, so that has seems to have been completed. So that's the provisioning to the waterstand controller. So let's enable guest for both the switching infrastructure as well as the wireless infrastructure. Okay, so Fabric Sites East Point, and let's go to host onboarding and virtual networks and select our guest VM and assign an IP pool to it. So let's select our guest IP pool and let's give it a name of guest as well as data traffic and wireless pool. So we'll deploy that. Okay, we can take a look at the Fabric Edge. So it has created the guest VRF on VLAN 1025. That's our guest anycast gateway on the VRF guest. Okay. If we go to then wireless SSIDs, so we see then the guest SSID in there, and we'll select the guest pool. We'll deploy that. Oh, that task has been sent to the controller. If we refresh in here, see that SSID created in there. Okay. So if I bring then that endpoint, I see that guest SSID is in there, but it should be unable to connect because we haven't configured anything from an ICE perspective. So let's bring ICE in here. There's a number of things we have to do in here. So first thing, let's go and create our authorization profiles. We'll create 2 of them. So let's do guest VM, for example. So for guest clients, wired. Let's do wired, yeah. And we will do VLAN guest. So is the VLAN name that I had given in here in DNA Center. So the VLAN name guest on host onboarding. Let's submit that. Guest VN. Let's also add one for wireless. So guest a wireless, and then we paste here. So what we're going to do here is for wireless, to assign that, we have to add an advanced attribute with the airspace interface name, and we'll give it a name of guest. Okay. And we also need one for redirection. Actually, you can see a SR guest VN being configured in there by DNA Center. Let's take a look at it. It has created the has already created the authorization profile for me for the redirections. So web redirections, so central or CWA. It has put this ACL in place, and the value for the portal would be SR guest VN, which is the portal that we had created. I'm going to also hard code here, just for the purpose of this lab, the IP address of ICE. And I will do as well here, same thing as assigning the VN. So airspace, interface name, guest. So I will save that, and we can inspect as well what's in this ACL. If we go to the waterstand controller, configuration AAA or configuration ACL actually, we see this ACL has been created by DNA Center. So towards the domain controller for DNS and DHCP, and as well towards ICE on any port particularly. So deny action means that I actually clicked something wrong there. Right, that's fine. Deny means that it's going to match it and allow it essentially, and permit will then deny, kind of like the inverse when it comes to redirects. Okay, so I have saved that there. So we can create our policy sets. I'm going to use the same map policy set, and I'm going to add a number of rules underneath here. So let's do wired first. So guest wired. So what we'll do, just simple, if it's wired map, let's do guest VN and a guest SCP. And let's duplicate that below. So it'll be guest wireless redirect. I won't make any wired guests go through the registration in this workflow. I'll just put them straight into the guest VN. But for wireless, we'll do portal registration. So guest wireless redirect if it's wireless map. Let's use that. It's going to go to the SR guest VN profile. Okay, and once that is once the wireless guest is has registered, we can then put him into the SVN for wireless with no redirection. So what we'll do here is if do an AND, so if it has completed the guest flow with an AND, if it's a wireless map and has completed the guest flow, then I'm going to put it in the guest wireless VN. Okay, let's save that. And hopefully we'll match our rules in there. So ideally, let me go to public edge number 2. So if I bring this this endpoint, so I have a physical connection on it towards fabric edge 2, and there's no .1x enabled on that NIC, and I see it has has passed the authentication there. So let's do ipconfig. So 10.53.19.221. So if I do, what port was that? So 36, show run or show authentication sessions. Chase 36, detail. So that was that 221 endpoint or IP on VLAN 1025, HTTP value of 6. So show run 1025. That's as we've seen the guest BRF and our HTTP value of 6 is guests. Okay. So let's disconnect that from the wire. And actually, we didn't check here on ICE what the radius look like. That has gone Microsoft endpoint map, hit the guest wired authorization rule that we created, and put in the guest VN. So we got the that 221 IP address. So ideally now, if we do guest SSID, we should be redirected then to our portal. Refresh here. Well, let's redirect and as our guest. But actually, before we do that, we didn't do anything with the portals. So let's have a look there. So work centers, portals, and components. You see there that is our guest VN that the DNA Center has created. But actually, let's look at our guest types first. So from our daily users, I have created in advance a daily guest VN guest type. So just essentially here, just put a count duration from first login. It's just set up to 1 day. Just one simultaneous login in there. Okay. Go back to the guest portal. That takes a second to load. And we see the portal coming up in there. So we can put a few settings in there. So portal settings. Let's do all user ID stores for logging in. Or actually, let's leave it at the guest portal sequence. Leave that as default in there. And let's move on to the login page settings. Allow guests to create their own accounts and to reset their password as well. Yeah, let's allow guests to change their password as the login as well. So registration form, so guest type will be the daily guest VN. It'll be valid for 1 day. And we'll ask for first name, last name, and email address. Leave the rest as the default. And so that's the success page. I think we're good as well from here. The success settings, UAP, and I think we should be good in here. So authentication success, so that's the URL that we had configured when creating the SSID in the DNA Center. Okay, we're fine there, so let's click save. Let's also test that portal. I think I have a DNS issue, so I'll have to use a different URL. If you give me a second, I'll pause and come back with the correct URL. Actually, I was just clicking on the wrong portal, so I should have gone to the sponsor portals. Sponsor portal URL. Should have clicked then this test URL. So here, let's log in there. Right now, there's no accounts or guest accounts in there. So here you can act as a sponsor and create a guest account. But we agreed that we're going to do self-registration. So in order to authenticate into that account, what I had done is here in identities, I had created a sponsor's internal account and made it a member of the all accounts user group. Okay. So ideally, we should now be able to go onto our endpoint, select the guest SSID, click connect in there. I have my portal showing up in there. So I don't have any guest account yet, so I have to register. So let's do user1 at email.com. Let's register. So user 101, and I had a notepad there here for testing. So let's sign on in there. Accept. Ideally, that should redirect to cisco.com. It did. If I go here to the live logs, we can see then our first redirection in here. So then we created our user, and then we see our user there hitting the guest wireless as opposed to the guest wireless redirect authorization rule, or authorization rule, and getting the guest wireless VN authorization profile with an IP address of 1053.19.218. If we look then at the sponsor portal, we can see then there's a managed account in there. So the user 101 with the user as a first name, last name 1, user1 email.com, and the time left it's 1 day. So it's a daily account. Okay, so that guest was able to successfully create a user and connect onto the network. Okay, so we have enabled our guest VN and assigned the IP pool to our switching fabric and our wireless fabric. We have seen how DNA Center created the guest portal. So we have reviewed that guest portal and changed a few settings on it. We have also configured and reviewed those size policy sets for guests, and we tested the endpoint both on the wired and on the wireless. So on the wired, we're just putting it into the guest VN straight away with no portals or redirection. Whereas on the wireless, we are presenting with a portal where the user can do a self-registration. There's one more thing that didn't make it in the video earlier, and it's due to the fact that I'm using a single firepower firewall. You wouldn't see this issue if you have a couple of firewalls in HA, but essentially I'm having two links, one to one border and one to the second border on that single firewall. So if traffic comes from this fabric edge, and typically on the fabric, traffic will be load balanced between borders. So if it may come on this border, one part of the traffic flow out the firewall up to ICE or the Active Directory, and the other part of the flow will come through this border and out this way. So when it comes back, the firewall kind of blocks that if it receives a packet from this border, but then it tries to come back through this border. So what I've done then is I tweaked a little bit the BGP path selection so as to make an asymmetric routing. So anything coming to border 2 will go then to port 1 and up to the firewall. So that meaning that this link on port 2 will be constantly in standby. So if we go to the firepower, for example, the firepower 1010, what I've done here, so on the what I've done is an AS path prepend coming from port 2. So for that guest VM subnet, I'm prepending one more path of 6500. So the firepower will always prefer the path towards the port 1 because it's only seeing one AS path in there. I didn't do anything on the port 1, but on the port 2 I had changed a few settings in there. So if I do show run section BGP, so DNA Center by default configures the weight towards either the fusion or the firewall as weight 65,535. It would have done the same in here towards the firewall on neighbor 154. So I had removed the weight on the firewall and put it towards the IBGP neighbor, which would be port 1. So if we do show IP BGP guest, so when we look at the default route, so it's going to prefer the IBGP, the route towards the IBGP neighbor, which is the 125. So if I do show IP route guest, then my default route will go towards the port 1. So show run. So that 10.53.19.125 would be port 1 then. As for the prepend, so I had added the a route map for prepend on the way out. So if you do show run section route map, let's actually do prepend. So I created this route map named prepend, and I'm setting the AS path. So I'm prepending one time the same AS path. Once that route map is created, so then advertise it out towards the neighbor with a network statement route map prepend out. So that way we're able to see the AS path twice on the firewall. Okay, so I wanted to bring that up in case you come across that issue. So with that, that's the end of the video. So hopefully this was informative. And if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out directly to me. So with that, I say goodbye. See you then.